Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Your Dog Bites Me? I'll uncover your illegal operation. This happened when I was 19, so about 5 years ago. I was walking home from a friend's house one morning and had my headphones in. He lived a bit out of town. We lived in a small town of 4,000 people. As I was walking, I turned the corner to get onto the main road. I had a big ditch to the left of me, and a row of rundown houses to the right. Then I see two dogs running towards me. I'm used to dogs running around here and looking for treats or to get pet. Anyways, one dog quits running while the other, a boxer breed, runs towards me. He bites my ankle. He latches down, ducking hard. I scream out in pain. He drags me down into the ditch. I fall on my back, look up and see this dog dive at my face. I kick him in the face, and jump up. There is a car honking at me that is trying to get me to get in. I crawl up the ditch, dog bites my leg again. Kick it, then get to the car. Dog jumps up at me, I block it with my arm. Now I have one bloody leg and one scratched up arm that is bleeding profusely. I get into the car and land in the lap of two women. I'm apologizing, asking to be taken to the hospital. I'm a mess. One woman says my name and says we were classmates. I apologize that I don't recognize her. They are coming home from church. I jumped into a car of Jehovah's Witnesses. The driver says he's going to drive slowly past the place. We see the boxer dog run up to a house, a woman looking outside, checking to see if the coast is clear, and lets him inside. Duck that witch. I call my mum and explain to her I'm heading to the hospital. She laughs but then realizes I'm serious. We get there, I apologize for the blood on their car, and get wheelchaired into the hospital. I have a nurse working on my arm and a doctor working on my leg. Wound wasn't deep enough for stitches, but the tooth got wiggled around when I tried getting him off. The bite mark is pouring out blood. It takes about 10 of those iodine needle things to clean it out. Then they do the other side of my leg. My mum gets there seeing tons of bloody bandages and stuff around me. She freaks out and calls the cops. After I'm cleaned up and on some good pain meds, I talk to an officer. After he takes some pics of my wounds for the case, I talk him through what happened. We then decided to go to the owner's place and check it out. We get there, cop knocks on door. Woman opens it. Excuse me, ma'am. I have a gentleman here who was knocked into the ditch by a dog living here, supposedly. Woman goes, no, my dog Hannibal, literally his name. Couldn't make that up, is an old dog that only has a couple teeth. No way would he hurt someone. Hannibal looks out and starts barking and snapping towards me. Woman drags him back. Policeman, well, I've seen enough. Woman, are they pressing charges? Police, not sure yet. So I go home, think about it and decide that I want my hospital costs to be paid for. And then a little bit for the pain. I think the total was like $2,000, hospital was about $1,250 of it. My mum's friend who was a lawyer said I could sue for up to $5,000, I decline and then get asked if I want the dog put down. I have a dog of my own. I love dogs. I couldn't put the dog down. I decline on that also. Knowing I don't want to have someone's animal put down if they love him. So fast forward a month. I am told the owner is wanting to go to court to argue against the charges. Excuse me, what? This is a clear-cut case. I have eyewitnesses, doctors that saw my injuries, pictures, a policeman who saw your dog go after me on site. What the hell? So I go to the courthouse, and even though the woman was not supposed to talk to me until we were in the courtroom, she comes over to me and says, I can't afford this. I'm so sorry. I have to fight it. Now I feel bad. I stay quiet and we go into the courtroom. I tell my side of it, the witnesses do too. I feel bad the whole time thinking this woman is about to lose everything. Policeman will show his findings the next day. I don't sleep all night. Next morning policeman comes by my place and asks to talk with me. I sit outside with him and tell him I think I'm going to drop most of the charges because I feel bad for this old lady. Policeman says, not so quick. I did some digging. He shows me pictures of the house and a small backyard in the back. There are literally 6 dogs, all boxes, stuffed inside this tiny backyard. Oh hell no. It gets worse. She owns them and keeps them for a wealthy guy in New York City. He sells them to people, not telling them that they are cooped up and aggressive as hell. I instantly think they are going to be put in dog fighting rings and such. I researched the price of a pure blood boxer. They can go from $500 to $3,000. She has 6 of them. Bullshit, she can't afford it. I'm sure she's had some other dogs before too. So I'm ready to do what needs to be done. Back to the courtroom. Judge, yesterday, I was told you were thinking about dropping the charges or at least lowering them? Me, yes, Your Honor. The woman gets really excited. Me, that is, until this morning. I found out some unsettling news about animal neglect and animal abuse. Woman's face gets shocked and then glares at me. Policeman goes and explains to the judge how the woman had never let the dogs out in the 3 days he watched the house. Fed them very little and ignored them completely. Hannibal had gotten through the fence and bit me. Judge is obviously an animal lover. Gets furious at the woman. I end up getting hospital bills covered, plus an additional $3,000. Woman loses all dogs to the animal shelter. I heard a couple had to be put down because they were so violent. The dude in New York got investigated, but I think he paid something that made it go away. Woman moved out of town after local paper heard news of it. The next one is titled, "So You Needed That Info After All." Well, it is not mine to give. I had this job several years ago where I was the support staff for several human resources reps who handled employment issues for a state agency. That involved hiring and selection of candidates. Once they had the paperwork ready, they handed that to me for data entry and archival. If one of the new hires had ever, and I mean ever, worked for a state agency in the past, they filled out a form where they indicated the dates and agency. I had to fax that agency a verification form. Not long after I myself was hired, another person, with whom I will share an office later, was hired, too. She was, and still is, a really nice person. I cannot recall what the issue was, but there was a payroll problem and one of the accountants called her and was generally unprofessional to her, including asking her whether they trained you all over there. My coworker told her supervisor what had happened, spoke to her while crying, and also via email, and it all made it up to the HR director. She felt really bad, but everyone else in human resources was supportive of her yet angry at the accountant. The accountant ended up leaving for another agency not long after that. Now, I mentioned before that I had to send out verification forms for other agencies to complete. By the same token, I had to provide the same for all the other agencies that sent them to me. I could only vouch for the dates of the agency I worked for, but I also included all the other prior dates I had in the personnel system as an FYI and also out of courtesy. Because the more time you showed as having worked for the state, the more money you got paid, but it had to be verified before they could give you credit and $$ for that. So one day several years later, I got a request from this former accountant for employment dates on someone who had gone to work for her agency. I recognized her name, but I did not want to be petty. That is not me, and I also thought of the professionalism showed by my co-workers, so I filled it out and faxed it back the same way I did with everyone else's. The next day she calls me and asks me why I had sent her some dates for a different agency. I explained to her I sent her what I had, mostly as a reference so she can ask that agency for that info. Well, she got all indignant about providing certification on information belonging to other agencies, that I should not be doing that, etc., etc. Okay. Fine. I told her I would re-fax it again sans the other info. But, alas. She was soon to fall on her own sword. Fast forward to a few months later. There was an employee who had retired from our agency and then gone to work for that other one. He had worked there before, but for only a few months and back in the late 60s, early 70s. Of course, those dates were difficult to track down, so sometimes you had to rely on other agencies' records, paper, computer printouts, prior completed verifications, to give credit to the employee. I think this retiree had worked only for them and then for us, so it was either us or nothing. So she faxed me a verification and I dutifully filled it out with our employment dates only and faxed it back. Not even 5 minutes later, she calls me asking about the other dates and why I had not provided those, apparently having forgotten our conversation the only other time I had spoken to her. The only words that came out my mouth during that phone call were, "Those are not our dates." I did not say I will not provide them, and if she had asked me, I would have, but she said nothing. After a few moments of silence, she hung up. I never got a phone call from her again. The last one is titled, "And I thought my boss wanted my best work." Be me, an age 22 male in Middle America. While in undergraduate education, I worked for my university's residential life department. I wasn't one of those floor monitors, though. Each of our dorms had a front desk which was open during the day to mainly deal with mail sorting for the residents who lived there, though we also dealt with security issues and customer service-oriented tasks. I began as a simple desk attendant and later was promoted to the supervisor position. This story takes place after 2.5 years of service for this department, the last 18 months of which I was the supervisor. During the first 2 years of working there, I was a general yes man. When asked to do a thing, I did my absolute best to finish the task, no matter what hoops I had to go through. I did this for 2 reasons. 1, I was happy to have a desk job that was away from the food service industry, and 2, I have a strong sense of personal integrity. My first reward was the aforementioned promotion. My second, and last, spoiler, reward was a trophy during the end-of-year awards ceremony for the department. This trophy signified that I was the highest contributing supervisor of all the 15 or so people in my position across the year. I took this as a high compliment. As I returned to my supervisor position during the following year, my senior year in undergraduate, I noticed that many of the things I had mentioned before leaving for the summer were not fixed. At each desk there is a manual that is alleged to detail each of the protocols a desk attendant must adhere to, yet these manuals were each different from desk to desk, and not a single manual was correct the entire way through. Some of the desks even had information so out of date that it referenced buildings knocked down during my grandparents' stay at the university. Yes, you read that correctly. And this information was still not updated through the summer break, when all the adults stayed and worked through the summer as it was. This year was destined to not turn out well. With the award from the previous year in mind, I told my boss my observation immediately. I was given the highly political, "Yes, we know, but make due" rhetoric that I was accustomed to, but I stressed that something would happen if the manual situation wasn't fixed. Lo and behold, something critical did in fact happen. Within the first week of residents living in the building, a small group of freshmen managed to do something to stall the elevator with them inside. One of my desk attendants happened to be new, so she consulted the manual, as she was trained, as I was told to train her. She refused to follow the instructions upon seeing them because she recalled my training session for this situation. She then made the associated calls, but then she was the one berated for half of an hour. Why? Because the local house mother, the person in charge of the floor monitors for the building, accused my desk attendant of not calling the campus police when this emergency situation appeared, just as it was written in the manual. I will admit that I got personally involved with this attack on my desk attendant because I feel that the work ethic of my attendants directly reflects my behavior as a supervisor. If I can't train my attendants, what use am I? So, a little bit more aggressively than I ought to have, I spoke to my supervisor, not the house mother. I report to someone else about the protocol that I recall being the proper one. Desk attendants are never to directly call campus police or actual police unless mortal danger is involved. In the case of entrapments in elevators, I was trained that the house mothers are charged with making such a call. My boss reluctantly agrees that I was correct and insists on trying to put right my now disgruntled attendant. I find out later that this house mother is slapped on the wrist for not knowing protocol and escalating a situation with my attendant. Since the critical situation appeared and it dealt directly with the manual's faulty wording, I mentioned this again to my boss. Again I got rhetoric about "we cannot fix any of this right now, do your best, yada yada," and I was directed to just remove the inaccurate information pertaining to the current situation. I'm dumbfounded by this, since I had on 2 separate occasions previously mentioned that the entire manual is the problem, not just sections of it. In a strongly worded email I explained that his solution was simply a stopgap, and that if the manuals were not updated, as they could have been months ago, then more situations like this would happen. He sent me a passive-aggressive reply to simply do as I was told. Fast forward several months and I am at my wit's end. My stress level is through the roof. I have had several more incidents that could have been avoided if only I was provided with working tools, which I had asked for and had been denied. My boss refused to help me with any of the issues that popped up at my desk. Often I received emails apologizing for having neglected to give me an important document that I needed for my business at the desk. Meanwhile, I had asked a different department to send me that information because of his negligence. It became abundantly clear that my contributions were welcome the previous year when I would just do as I was told, but not now that I was attempting to go through my job without stumbling anymore. Later, my house mother accused my desk of not following procedure through a series of vague texts. I asked her what it was she meant, as she was renowned for inventing new procedures and telling no one about them. She refused to explain what she meant, and since she was texting me at 8 p.m. the night before an important assignment was due, I decided to decline her invitation for a meeting 5 minutes from then. I decided instead to write a very strongly worded email to my boss about this behavior, since I had been doing my absolute best to manage my desk with the little resources at my disposal, and I firmly believed that the house mother had no right to invade my management the way she was. The next thing I knew, it was 2 days later, I was 2 meetings deep, and I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. I had spent an hour and a half in a meeting with my boss explaining my intent behind my unprofessional email. I got even more rhetoric about needing to dial down my passive-aggressive nature. I also received no acknowledgement of any wrongdoing on his part or the house mother's. I decided on my own to apologize to her about my remarks in the email I was certain my boss shared to her. While in that meeting, I began to break down from the browbeating from both of them that morning. While explaining to the house mother that her behavior did not make me feel comfortable at my job, she stopped our conversation and asked me the following: "Have you ever thought about hurting yourself?" After I replied, "No," she responded, "That doesn't sound convincing." She ended up concluding that meeting by giving me counseling advice and sending me away. I left the office in tears and spent the next hour in my dorm wrapped in a sheet. I could not forget the words that were said on this day from either of them. I especially could not forget my boss's comment: "I noticed that you are quite stressed, Red Falcon. I know that you always give 100%, but could you do 80%? I think that will reduce your stress." I had laughed at him at the time for such a suggestion. He seriously asked me to do less work. Less work, when all I wanted to do was make the little amount of work I need to do easier, and avoid problems in the process. What a load of crap. I instantly knew that I needed to get out of this terrible crap storm, and the revenge is almost upon us. I had to find new living arrangements because my dorm was tied to my job's payment plan. I sent in my 2 weeks' notice with my self-evaluation form, standard thing my boss was expecting me to return to him. The 2 weeks' notice was a big deal because my position was year-long and I was quitting before winter break. I go to see him at my self-evaluation meeting 4 days before the end of the semester, and the conversation that ensued was nothing but classic. I notice immediately that he has not left any written comments on my form, only numbers ranking my performance. His laziness and negligence bled through to the evaluation of his employee here, too. Shocker. He attempted to explain this away by saying that the comments would be useless since I was leaving. He then sifts through my extensive comments on the lack of support from my boss, the overbearing nature of the house mother, and lack of proper manuals and other tools, to just focus on one tiny comment about my personal goals. He says to me, "I notice here that you are unsatisfied with your progress on your personal goal to finish your second novel. If someone asks you to do extra work and you aren't working, then you should have told them no." I immediately went from neutral to strikingly angry. Not only had he skipped over the important details, he brought in my personal life in the process of misinterpreting my main complaint. The job was the reason I was stressed, and I wasn't doing extra work. I was doing the base work that was extremely cumbersome without proper tools, manuals, and guidance from above. I accused him of this directly to his face, and his clueless expression was priceless. He asked me verbatim, "You mean to tell me that this job is the reason for your stress?" I seethed out at yes, while looking him directly in the eyes. For a literal 5 seconds neither of us says anything. He continues to stare into my eyes and I stare back. I refuse to let him win this staring contest. I win it because he looks away. "Fine," he says condescendingly, "if that's how you feel, then it's a good thing you aren't coming back." He hands me a piece of paper to sign and be done with it. And this is the moment you've been waiting for, folks, my revenge. You know, boss man, while I was making accommodations to leave this position, I was informed by the housing department that if my last day of employment was today, then I would get all of my refunded payments in 1 month, instead of the refund being spread out across 2 months. I had simply accepted this since I had intended to finish out the week, as I mentioned to you previously. However, because of how this meeting went, I am choosing to terminate my employment today. My desk is scheduled through the remainder of the week, and I have the highest expectations that my team will be able to continue the last 4 days without me. My boss's face was in shock, his jaw dropped. You mean to tell me that today's your last day? Yes. Well, I'm going to have to put a comment on your form about this. Okay, I reply, remembering his note about how useless those comments would be from the beginning of the meeting. Upon seeing that this didn't work, he attempted a second petty revenge. And I'm going to have to tell every future employer who asks for a recommendation just how you went back on your word. Okay. You do that. And you should at the same time tell them how you agreed that leaving is a good decision for me. We're done. He half yells at me. He then swivels in his chair away from me to face his computer. I laugh and say, wow, at him as I stood up and left the room. And I thought my boss wanted my best work. So much for my award for Best Supervisor Contribution. Thanks for listening.